This is the Story Project interview with longtime Caldwell County resident Gene Ford at his home in Patterson, North Carolina on February 10th, 2013.
Mr. Ford, where and when were you born?
I was born in Watauga County, June the 22nd, 1943.
Can you describe the place you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in the Blackberry community, which is the upper end of Caldwell County. We did live in Watauga County for the first few months of my life, and then my dad worked for a man over there. The reason we were in Watauga County, Dad worked for a man in that county, and soon after I was born, we moved back to Caldwell County, where he could work some more with his dad in their sawmill business, farming, or whatever they were doing. And grew up in like I said, in the Blackberry community, and Dad inherited a piece of land from his dad, and he built a house there, and we lived in that house, which was pretty rough. Wasn't nothing up to date in that house. No bathroom, anything like that. We had running water, had to carry water, and things of that nature, which was fine. It's just, and then later on, of course, he put in bathrooms and that kind of thing. But life was a whole lot different then than what it is now. Jobs were scarce, and people didn't have a lot of work back in them days. A lot of the men from our area came to Lenoir to the furniture factories to work. Some of them still done sawmilling and that kind of thing, and that's what my dad preferred to do, and he did, and it made life pretty rough at times. But anyway, after I got big enough to start working on my own, I would walk from where we lived to the Blowing Rock area, and a lot of times just go from house to house, ask them if they had any work, anything that they needed done, and I would do it for $1, $2, whatever I could get. And from there, then that would be in the early spring, and then in the summer come in while the golf course would open, and the golfers would start playing the golf, and the boys from the area I lived in, we would walk up there and carry the caddy bags and carry the golf bags around for them for $2 or $3, whatever it paid. If you carried one bag, it was $2. If you carried two bags, it's $3.50. Most of the guys tipped us $1, which was enough to buy a shirt or buy shoes, whatever you had to have. And then from there, when I had an uncle lived in Blowing Rock, it took care of a lot of summer homes, and he found out I was looking for work to do, and he hired me to work with him. And I worked with him for 2 or 3 springs, cleaning up and doing the work there. And then as soon as we get done with that work, I would go to the caddy thing for a year or so. And then another man found out I was looking for work, and he had a masonry crew, and he hired me to wait on the masons that's carrying the cement and the mud and the rock and the block and the work, waiting on the masons. And I'd done that most of the summers for about 3 summers before I finished high school. And I finished high school at Happy Valley in 1962. Got a job at Lenoir Veneer, which is a Broyhill plant in Lenoir, and on the maintenance crew, and I worked there, and there was 2 veneer mills side by side, and I worked at one of them 2 years, one of them 3 years. That was the first 5 years after I finished high school. And then from there, I went to Cellular Products here at Patterson, and I was there 9 years. Then I worked for an electrical company 2 years, and then I went to work for Greer Laboratories, and I worked there 27 years and retired 7 years ago.
Are there any courtship stories, and how did your parents or grandparents meet?
I really don't know how my parents met. My dad lived up in the area, at the Blackberry area, and my mother lived over in the Globe, Johns River area. And I do know Dad walked from there across there to see her back in their courting days. And then I don't know, just they got married in 1939, I think it was, but I don't know anything much about that. They did talk a little bit about when Daddy could borrow Grandpa's car and places they went and things like that, but don't remember too much about that.
Where did you and Mrs. Ford meet?
Well, I guess to start with, we met at church, because we both went to the same church all of our lives, and from church and school and whatever. So Mom and I started dating or talking or going with each other when she wasn't but about 13 or 14. And then we courted for about 3 years. And we got married. And we've been married 47. So we've been together really 50 years, thereabouts. But there's a lot of stories in that. When we started dating, Daddy had a car, and I'd drive the car once in a while. Sometimes I'd walk from my house to her house to see her. And then soon after that, I got my first car. And of course, from there on, we had a way of traveling, a way to go wherever and whenever we wanted to. And then that's about it as far as all that.
How far was the distance from your house to her house?
Probably 2 miles. About 2 miles. But I had a shortcut through the woods, cross country through the woods to get to Linda's house. And all of that was didn't seem no problem. Didn't seem like that far. Back then we walked a lot anyway, and it didn't really make any difference how far it was.
So, what was it like raising your kids?
As compared to the way people raise their kids today.
Well, it's a whole different world. Back up just a little bit. I married Linda Talbert. Her dad and mom run an apple orchard, and that was where she was raised in the area they call Green's Trading Post now. And that from over in the Blackberry, where the mom was where I was talking about walking to. But anyway, then Linda and I got married August the 9th in 65. And then Jerome came along in about a year and a half, 2 years. And then another year or so, Reginald came along. But it was a lot different raising kids, I guess you'd say raising kids, because as it was when I was at home, you always had something to do. There's always work to do. You didn't just go home and sit down and play video games and this type of thing, because there wasn't no such thing. I was probably 12 or 13 years old before we even had a television, and probably that age by the time we got a telephone. But anyway, we had work to do. We always had to cut wood, carry water, feed cows, milk cows, take care of that kind of thing. And then, in the summertime, we always had gardening. I always helped my mother with the garden. I had one sister, and she was disabled and wasn't able to do a lot of things. So, and Dad was gone working, so I helped Mom with that kind of thing all summer long. And it seemed like we'd never get done with that, the canning and all that stuff that she tried to do. And she tried to can enough for 2 or 3 families, seemed to me like, picking the blackberries and the beans and all these things that we done. But it all, life was good. I look back and I think about how little, compared to what we have today, how little we had. But it was enough at that time, and God's always been good and took care of us. And we raised the 2 boys and and taught them to work. And we worked. We had a small apple orchard, and we worked in that. And we would work. There's always work to do at there in the orchard, as far as pruning the trees, mowing the grass, underneath the trees, pruning the trees, spraying the trees. And then when it come apple picking time, it took all of us, me, Linda, and both the boys. It took all of us to take care of the apples, because we had to pick them, we had to bag them. We bagged them in 4-pound bags and hauled them to the stores in Lenore. And it was just a way of making a living. And Linda and I both worked all the time too, and plus doing that. So the boys always had plenty of work to do, and never did get in no trouble and all that kind of thing. So life was good. And about 23 years ago, we moved out of the Blackberry community and came down to the Patterson area.
What family heirlooms or keepsakes do you possess? And the stories behind these?
Well, the first thing I can think of right off that there is a story behind, I have a bull yoke, which a lot of people wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. But when they work the bulls or the steers, they yoke the 2 together. And I have one that belonged to my dad, and his brother, because they had a yoke of ox that they worked. And further back, my grandpa had his brother to make this thing. And of course, I guess Grandpa paid him to do so. He made it, and then he gave it to my dad and his brother. And then they had my great grandma, they had her old side saddle that the women rode, a side saddle they called it. So between the two of them, they owned the saddle and they owned the bull yoke. So sometime or other in life, they traded. Daddy ended up with the bull yoke, and his brother ended up with the saddle. And I still have that, and it's still in good condition. And I also have some little old hammer-looking like things. They call them mill picks, which is what they groove the rock out with. That when they ground the meal at the grist mills, and those old big rocks that grind the meal, they got grooves in them, and these little hammers were made to cut those grooves out with. I've got some of them, and I've also got his old pocket watch, which was a Waltham pocket watch, and no telling how old that thing is, but I've still got it, and it still will run. Dad was William Ford, and of course they called him Bill, and his dad was John Clinton Ford, and his mama was Barbara Bolick Ford. And Barbara Bolick was raised in what they call the Bailey Camp community. My grandpa Ford was raised in the Blackberry community, which Blackberry and Bailey Camp is all just one big place. Ain't a whole lot, you just one area to the other. Not that big a deal. My grandpa was born in 1878, in April 1878. My grandma was born in May of 1878. Grandpa died. He was 66 years old when he died, and Grandma, I think she was 73 when she died. I'm not sure exactly the date. My grandma, like I said earlier, she was a Bolick, and down in what they call the Bailey Camp community, down on the creek, my great grandpa Marcus Bolick owned no telling how much land that he owned. So my grandma inherited a portion of that land, and so she and my grandpa, they sold that land and took the money they got from that land and bought a big tract of land further up on the Blowing Rock Mountain, which is the land where I was raised, is a portion of that land that Dad got from his grandpa. But anyway, so my grandpa bought, I think it was 150 acres of land in 1916, and this took in the Blowing Rock, the oldest travel attraction in North Carolina. It took that in. So Grandpa bought that with the money that they got from the land that belonged to my grandma. But anyway, he bought that land with that, and he owned the land till 1936, and he sold that land in 1936 for $10,000, which now would just be a joke. But at that time in 1936, just imagine what $10,000 would do, And I never did know too much about what all Grandpa done with that money. I do know that he was in real estate, bought some different places and sold them and things like that. And there was a section of land up there near the golf course that he bought. He went to an auction sale one day, and they had several lots that were going to auction off, and they started off with the cheapest, the sorriest lot, and nobody bid, and then finally he bid for it, and they sold it to him, and there was 6 or 7 lots, and he was the only one that bid. So they sold him that lot, and they asked him, said, "You're the bidder, how many lots do you want?" He said, "I'll take them all." Well, there were several people there that were interested in the lots, but they told him he could have his choice, so he took all the lots. Well, then before he left there that day, he had sold every one of them. He didn't. He sold every one of the lots and made money on them. That's one of the stories. And then he had bought a farm over in Boone, a small farm, and one of the daughters and her husband bought it from him. He bought another farm in near Blowing Rock, and another one of his daughters and her husband bought that land. And then he had the 150 acres there where my dad was raised. 1953 or 4, I think it was when after my grandma died, that they divided all that land up, and that's when Dad got the part that I still own. But Grandpa Ford, I don't know how he got his money before he sold the rock, but I do know that Grandpa was the first man in that community anywhere there to own a car, and I never did hear him say what the first cars was that he had, and he was the first one in the area to own a truck. And the old big house that he built was the first house in that area to have lights. Now the people up in Blowing Rock did, but not down in under the country, down in there. And the way he got the money or got it done to have lights in the house, Bell Telephone wanted a right of way across his property to run a telephone line. So he gave them a right of way for that telephone, and in return they paid for having his house wired to have lights in it. And that's the only house in that country that had lights way back. I don't know in what year it might have been that other people started getting power and getting lights, but soon after, I guess.
Do you wish the rock had stayed in your family?
Well, I guess so. But there's so many. There were so many in the family. It'd have been hard for it to been of much value to any certain one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did Mr. Ford also own a cafe in the area?
Yeah. He had a little cafe up there they called Cloudline Cafe, and he sold sold hot dogs and candies and drinks and that kind of thing. And we was talking earlier about things that I might have that belong to Grandpa. Grandpa's had the little cafe, and after they done away with that, I mean, he sold it and everything. The dishes and things that were in the cafe, he got them. And when they divided my grandma's stuff, each one of the kids got a piece of some of that china. And what we still have a cup and saucer that came out of that. So that's probably about the oldest thing, one of the oldest things I've got of this.
Who were your mother's parents? Where were they from?
My mother's parents were from Linville. Her dad was Granville Monroe Hartley, and he was from Linville. And my grandma, Granny Hartley, was Cora Jane Teaster. And I'm not really sure where she was from, but the Hartleys were from the Linville area, and that's where my grandpa came from. And then they moved and lived down in the Globe section. It's where they raised their family.
Did she work?
No. My mother never did work on public works, or my grandmother never did. No.
How many siblings did she have?
They was 10 or 11, I think, children in her family. And of course, all of them are dead now.
Okay, talk about the grandfather singing.
We hear a lot about the grandfather mountain singing. The Hartley family reunion is where that started. That originated, the grandfather singing on the mountain originated from the Hartley family reunion. And my grandpa had some brothers, but the one brother, Mr. Joe Hartley, he was the one that kept that thing going. That was a big thing to him. But that is where that originated from.
How's this area changed since you were a child? Like roads?
Well, in the area I was raised in, it's not, other than the road being a paved road now, other than it being paved, there's not a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference in the people. Most of the old folks are died out, and a lot of people moved in that I don't. And when I was a young'un and growing up and on for years, everybody knew everybody, and And but now for me to go up there, it's not. There's a lot of people I don't know, you know. But as far as there's never no industry in there as far as that goes in that certain area, but more than sawmills and farming and that kind of thing, and about all of that's gone. And there's other than the road being paved, that's about the biggest changes. And of course, the houses are bigger and better and nicer and all that kind of thing.
What about the industry here in Caldwell, as far as furniture?
Well, the industry here in Caldwell, like when I was talking earlier about working at veneer mills and so on, had all these plants in Lenore working hundreds of people, and now they're down. They've just so many of them have closed down. So it's a sad time for people now needing work and wanting work, and there ain't no work.
Where did you go to school?
Went to Happy Valley.
Happy Valley.
12 years. Graduated in 1962.
Were there many people even thinking about college?
Very few. Very few. It never did enter my mind. I get, but I'm sure there's some. I can't remember, and I don't know exactly, but a few out of my graduating class probably did go to college, but not many.
Why or why not? I think.
If they didn't want to go to college.
Well, it was back then. They pushed you to get a high school education, and that's about as far as the teachers told them. That's about as far as they pushed you for. It was to get that, which was real important. And I guess most of us were just interested in getting out of school, getting a job, and going on our merry way, I guess.
Did you participate in any school clubs or sports?
Baseball. I played baseball some, and usually played center field or shortstop when I played ball. And of course, didn't play no basketball because I wasn't tall enough. It takes and then I was in the FFA, treasurer of the FFA 2 or 3 years, and of course I drove a school bus a couple of years.
There was no way they would let a high schooler drive a bus now like you did then.
All the buses were most all the buses driven by high school boys. We had one girl that drove a bus, and we had 2 of the ladies from another area that drove 2 of the buses out of the Buffalo area. And other than that, they were all driven by the boys, and most of us was juniors and seniors.
What are the differences in schools then as compared to now?
In the schools,
Yes, sir.
then when you went to school, when you went in and the teacher said sit down, we're starting the lessons, you did. There was more respect for the authority over you. And the principal, what he said, you done. I mean, and now, from what I hear, nobody minds nobody, or nobody, it just don't, I don't know. Nobody has authority to make a kid do what he needs to do if he's misbehaving, or to jerk him up and take his hide off and set him down, let him go, he'd be all right. But they can't do that now. But back then, they'd take you to the principal's office and bust your tail.
Back then, you didn't have to worry about security like they have to
Never
now
even
in
thought
schools.
about that. We carried pocket knives. I mean, there was never nothing. Nobody never gonna cut nobody. Never even thought about needing security around school. Why? There was one of the boys that was going to go home with me and go squirrel hunting with me on a Saturday. He brought his gun to school, set it in the corner, and went on the bus and went home with me. I mean, and so there was never, just things like that didn't even enter our mind back then.
What were some of your hobbies?
My hobbies?
Yes, as you had growing up.
Most of it was working, but I did like to hunt and fish and that kind of thing. And that's the biggest thing.
What stories do you have about like your hobbies, hunting and working?
Hunting, I used to always had rabbit dogs, rabbit hunted and squirrel hunted, fox hunted, just coon hunted, just whatever. But in our area now, a lot of people deer hunt anymore, but there was no deer in the area, in our area, back in my younger days.
What advice do you have for the young people of today as they're growing up and fixing to go out into the world? Advice you have for us?
Well, the first advice I give to any young man, your age, his age, or even younger, to know Jesus. I mean, that should be first. That's got to be first if you ever make it.
Yes.
And after that, and the book says, seek Him first, and His righteousness, all these other things will be added. So He'll take care of you from there on. But yeah, and be that first, and then be willing to work, get along with other people, and don't always think it's got to be your way. It can be, you might be wrong. It might be somebody else got the best way, and so just there's a whole lot. There's a whole lot to it from here on. Be real careful about who you get for your mate. Pray about that. Don't just grab the first thing that comes along.
So, you would say that's the key to a happy life and successful life also?
Yes, sir. Yeah, of course.
When you started working, how much did you work for?
Well, going back to what I talked about earlier about working around Blowing Rock at the different ones, they was the guy that I worked for that had all the summer homes that he looked after. There were some of those people would pay 50 cents an hour, and there's some that pay 75 cents an hour. So I worked for that kind of wages. But then when I got the job with the masonry crew, that man paid me $1.25 an hour. But then when I after I finished high school and went to work in 1962 with a regular job at the factory, I started out $1.15 an hour. Minimum wage was probably $1 at that time. I don't know exactly, but started me out at $1.15 an hour, which is not even dropping the bucket of what to get today.
How was life when you first went out on your own, away from your parents?
Well, when I left home was when I got married, and life was good. Of course, there was some hard times as far as finances and that kind of thing, but life was good, and Mom and I made it real good.
What were some of the household expenses?
Well, you didn't have all these extras that we have today. There's no such thing as insurance. Well, there was, but we didn't fool with any such thing as insurance. We lived in a house with no rent, just an old house that we lived in the first 4 years after we got married, and that's when the two kids were born. And the light bill back then, Blue Ridge sent their bills out every 2 months, and our light bill would be like $14, $15 for 2 months because we didn't have all these things. You burn so much electricity. I don't even know. Gas was probably 25 cents a gallon, maybe 30 cents a gallon, and it's just a whole different world. Linda was talking earlier about when we first got married and we went and got our first supply of groceries, and this is everything to start and for a week for all the cleaning things and everything we needed was like $38. Great long list of stuff. Today it'd probably be $500. And so it's just a different world of what it is today as far as pricing, and the price of things and the way people. Then you just bought what you had to have. You didn't buy just everything.